Okay, but we were talking about Ukraine, and I threw you off track.
Okay.
You were making the point that the U.S. has an expansionist vision about its role in the world, a global, you know, taking care of it. Everything is in our backyard. We really care about the status of Taiwan.
Right. What
We,
precisely?
that's another example.
Well,
But
this is so this is what I would say. I don't think we really do care. So this is, I think, the problem, right? I think there's like this inertial position. I don't think if the PRC and there are going to be experts who say, well, they can't do this. The weapons. I'm just saying philosophically, if the PRC invaded Taiwan, I do not think the United States would fight World War III over it. I do not think that is what will happen. Just like I don't think the United States would fight a World War III over Ukraine, as we're seeing right now. So what I actually fear, well, not really fear, that might not be the right word, but I think that in the next 15, 20 years, we're not going to do things like re-examine the assumption of primacy. China might do something dramatic with Taiwan. The United States will then just retreat and actually leave our allies unprepared to deal with what's actually happening in that region, which is the rise of Chinese regional hegemony. I don't think that's necessarily, without value judgments, whether that's good or whether that's bad, that seems to be a reality that is going to happen in the next 15, 20, 25, 30 years, whenever. So the United States...
You dropped the so-called modifier there.
Well, when we're talking about regional, yeah. Regional, okay. It's factual. When we're talking about global, it's not.
Got it.
And I think it's framed globally in the media and places like China's going to get into Latin America. They've made some moves, but China's not going to expand to the Western Hemisphere. That's not a goal of the People's Republic of China or the Chinese Communist Party. I think it's absurd to say that. But in the region, they want regional hegemony, which they had for, a long time. So I think that what U.S. policy elites need to do is need to be examining this new reality and actually preparing for it and preparing South Korea, Japan, other regional allies for what is going to be a changing regional geostrategic structure. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that there'll be some dramatic event and the U.S. will just not totally cut and run, but will do what's in its interest, which is not to fight World War III with a Chinese regional hegemon. And so I just think our foreign policy discourse is very, whatever the opposite of elevated is.
So we're bluffing.
Yeah. And that's what Putin's basically doing. I think what Putin's showing the world is that U.S. relative power is declining. That the United States is not going to, go to war over Ukraine or go to war over another power, redrawing international boundaries. And of course, the ironic thing is Putin loves referring to Kosovo and how the United States essentially did that with regards to Serbia in the 1990s. He's like, see, I'm showing I could also redraw the international boundaries. You thought it was only you, but Russia's a great power. We're not just a middle power. We're a great power. And I think that's what Putin's really trying to do here.
So am I wrong to be terrified?
Yes.
At the prospect that somebody, I don't think Joseph Biden is necessarily that somebody, but what do I know? And, when they call your bluff and you turn the table over?
Like Biden will do something dramatic?
Yeah, and as a way of, I'm tough. I'm not going to be pushed around. We're the United fucking States of America, and we stand for the security of recognition of sovereign borders, democracy, et cetera, and get us into a conflict that we'll regret down the road.
I don't see that happening. Of course, it's always a possibility. Biden could theoretically do something like that, especially because Congress doesn't have to declare war anymore, even though the Constitution says that. But I find it hard to see right now because there's so little U.S. interest in what's happening there. There's no real U.S. interest there. It could happen. This is the problem with events like this. It's not impossible, okay. But I don't think that's likely.
So rather than a vain flailing conflict, you see a loss of credibility and the subsequent unraveling of trust in our commitments by allies.
Not necessarily, because I think I bet most world leaders know like who the US's like major allies really are and who they aren't. You know, world leaders aren't foolish for the most part. The U.S. might do something with regards Western Europe, with Israel, Saudi Arabia right now, but it's not like it's going to fight in Eastern Europe. So I don't think there's a real loss in U.S. credibility. The loss in credibility is just the last 20 years of American history with Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, et cetera, et cetera. What is dangerous to me about Ukraine is that Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons. And I think this
Yeah.
30 years ago, and I think this suggests to international powers like never ever give up your nuclear weapons, particularly after Gaddafi. Gaddafi also gave up his
So
nuclear
did
program.
Gaddafi, yeah.
Yeah, and look what happened to him. So I think if we're talking macro, that is the most problematic thing. This suggests that proliferation is a good it is what you should do as a state. Like if you don't have nuclear weapons, then you don't have a deterrent. So that to me is the most frightening thing about this particular event when we're talking globally. But I don't think there's going to be American troops sent to Ukraine. There's not. Categorically, there will not be American, boots on the ground. They might send weapons. They might send quote unquote advisors, which I guess are boots on the ground. But I don't think we'll see something like Iraq there. I'd
All
be
right,
shocked.
now I'm trying to think. I think of Matt Taibbi, a journalist who writes in the spirit that you are giving voice to about the Ukraine crisis, but the mainstream media not so much.
Yeah, because they have the assumption of primacy. I mean, like the average writer at the New York Times thinks it's God's right, given right to the United States to govern the entire world now and forever. They don't even know. It's like the water they swim in. It's the air they breathe. They don't even know that's what they think, but that's what they think. And that's, I think, extraordinarily problematic. And it wasn't always the case. If you went to the 30s, the Times does not believe that. It's a post-World War II thing, and it's a post-Cold War thing, especially. The end of history moment, the unilateral moment. We're still living in that ideologically, even if the power realities on the ground suggest otherwise.